She jumped on his block more times than on mine. I never thought my marriage would come to this. Olivia and I had been together for 10 years. 10 years of building a life, a home, a partnership. Sure, we weren't perfect. There were times we fought over the usual stuff: money, chores, my long hours at work. But we always managed to patch things up. Or so I thought. Things started feeling different a couple of months ago. I had just returned from a 3-week business trip overseas, and Olivia's reaction to seeing me wasn't what I expected. Usually, she'd be all smiles, wrapping me in one of those tight hugs that made me feel like I was finally home. This time, it was a half-hearted smile and a casual, "Hey, welcome back," as she scrolled through her phone on the couch. Something felt off. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. She was probably just tired from a long day. But as the weeks went by, more little things started piling up. She'd go to bed hours after me, claiming she was watching a show, but her phone never left her hand. I'd hear the faint ping of notifications at odd hours, and when I asked about it, she'd brush me off, saying it was just her group chat with the girls. The final straw came one night when I was going through the footage on our home security camera. We'd installed a doorbell camera a year ago after a package theft in the neighborhood. It was one of those things I rarely checked unless something seemed suspicious. That night, as I scrolled through recent recordings, I noticed a pattern. The pizza delivery guy, young, tall, tan, had been showing up way more often than we ordered pizza. I played the clips back in order. There he was, standing at the door, his delivery bag slung over his shoulder, flashing Olivia a smile as she leaned against the doorframe in a tank top and shorts. They talked for longer than you'd expect for a pizza drop-off. Once, she even invited him in. The timestamp showed he didn't leave for 20 minutes. At first, I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. Maybe the guy was just chatty, or maybe Olivia was being polite. But my gut told me otherwise. Something about the way she laughed, the way she fiddled with her hair, felt wrong. And who invites a delivery guy inside for 20 minutes unless there's more to the story? That night, as Olivia lay beside me, scrolling through her phone like always, I stared at the ceiling, my chest tight with dread. I had no proof, just a gnawing suspicion and a stack of unsettling doorbell footage. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something that would change everything. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the footage. I replayed those clips in my head over and over again, each time catching a new detail that made my stomach turn. The way Olivia's smile lingered when she spoke to him. The casual touch on her arm when he handed her the receipt. I was driving myself crazy, but I couldn't let it go. I decided to check the camera's full archive, hoping to convince myself I was wrong. I pulled up the footage from the last 3 months and went down the rabbit hole. What I found turned my stomach. This wasn't just a random delivery guy dropping off an occasional pizza. He was at our house at least once a week, sometimes twice. And it wasn't always during dinner hours. There were clips of him arriving mid-afternoon while I was at work and leaving 30 minutes later. The timestamps lined up with the days Olivia claimed she was running errands or meeting friends. The worst part? I found one clip where Olivia greeted him at the door wearing nothing but a silk robe. She pulled him inside, laughing as if they were sharing some private joke. He didn't leave for 45 minutes. I couldn't keep ignoring it. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was real. My wife was cheating on me with the pizza delivery guy. I felt sick, my chest tightening as I sat there staring at the screen. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped my phone. A part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, but another part of me knew I needed more. If I went to her with just these clips, she'd find a way to lie her way out of it. Olivia was smart, too smart for me to give her the benefit of the doubt anymore. So I did what any desperate man would do. I started digging. The next morning, I waited until Olivia was in the shower, then grabbed her phone off the nightstand. My heart was pounding as I unlocked it. I knew her passcode by memory after all these years. I opened her messages, scrolling past the usual group chats and family updates until I found a conversation with a contact saved as Tony Pizza Pizza. It was worse than I imagined. The texts were explicit, filled with flirtatious banter and innuendos that left no room for doubt. He'd sent her shirtless selfies from what looked like his car, and she replied with selfies of her own, one she'd clearly taken in our bedroom. One message hit me harder than the rest. "Missed you today, babe," he'd written. Next time, I'm bringing dessert. Dessert. In my own house. I put her phone back before she could notice, my mind racing. I couldn't believe this was happening. Olivia, the woman I'd loved for 10 years, the person I trusted more than anyone, was sneaking around with a pizza guy like we were in some bad sitcom. But this wasn't a joke. It was my life, falling apart piece by piece. When Olivia stepped out of the shower, humming some cheerful tune like nothing was wrong, I forced a smile and pretended everything was fine. But inside, I was a mess. I couldn't even look her in the eye without picturing those texts, those photos, the way she laughed with him in the doorbell footage. I decided to bide my time. If I was going to confront her, I needed to do it when I had all the facts, and when I was ready to hear whatever excuse she'd try to throw at me. For now, I kept my cool, but every moment I spent pretending was like torture. That night, as Olivia curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone like always, I sat across from her, quietly watching her laugh at some joke on her screen. She had no idea I knew, but I did, and the thought of what I'd uncovered haunted me. Why the next morning, I was walking a tightrope between keeping calm and losing it completely. Every time Olivia smiled at me, every time she asked how my day was, I felt like screaming, "How could you do this to me?" But I couldn't, not yet. I needed to stay in control. The texts between her and Tony weren't just playful. They were blatant. There were mentions of specific times and dates, times that lined up with her errands and my business trips. I also found references to their spot, which I figured had to be somewhere close by. I took a deep breath and made a decision. If I was going to confront Olivia, I needed undeniable proof, something she couldn't spin into another excuse. The texts were damning, sure, but I needed to catch her in the act. That's when I came up with a plan. I told Olivia I'd be going on another business trip the following week. It wasn't a lie. I had been scheduled for one. But what she didn't know was that I was planning to come back early. The idea of catching her red-handed felt both terrifying and necessary. The week dragged on like molasses. Every day, I went through the motions, acting like the same clueless husband she probably thought I was. But inside, I was unraveling. At night, I'd scroll through the security footage again, each clip a painful reminder of what was happening under my nose. Then came the day of my trip. Olivia kissed me goodbye at the door, her lips lingering just long enough to make me question my sanity. She smiled that familiar smile, the one that used to make me feel like the luckiest man alive. Now it just made me feel sick. "Have a safe flight, babe," she said, waving as I pulled out of the driveway. I drove down the street, parked around the corner, and waited. I had set the doorbell camera to send notifications to my phone anytime someone came to the door, so all I had to do was sit tight and wait for Tony to show up. An hour passed. Then two. I was starting to think maybe I'd overplayed my hand when my phone buzzed. The notification from the camera app popped up. Motion detected at front door. My hands shook as I opened the live feed. There he was, Tony, wearing his pizza uniform, and that smug grin I'd come to hate. He rang the doorbell, and Olivia appeared moments later, her hair tied up in that casual, effortless way she always did when she wasn't trying too hard. I watched as they exchanged smiles, as she stepped aside to let him in, and as the door closed behind them. This was it. No more guessing, no more second-guessing. I had my proof. I waited another 20 minutes, my heart racing, before I decided to make my move. I drove back to the house, parking quietly down the street so they wouldn't hear me pull up. The walk to the front door felt like it took an eternity. My chest was tight, my palms sweaty as I fumbled for my key. When I stepped inside, I heard them before I saw them. Muffled voices coming from the living room, followed by Olivia's unmistakable laugh. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps deliberately heavy, letting them know I was there. The talking stopped immediately. "Olivia," I called, my voice louder than I expected. There was a shuffle of movement, and then Olivia appeared in the doorway, her face pale as a ghost. Behind her, Tony stood awkwardly, looking like a deer caught in headlights. He wasn't holding pizza. "What are you doing here?" Olivia stammered, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms, my gaze shifting between her and Tony. "I could ask you the same thing," I said coldly. Tony's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Olivia stepped forward, as if to shield him from me. It's not what it looks like, she blurted, her tone frantic. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Not what it looks like. So you just stopped by to what? Deliver pizza without a box? Give me a break, Olivia. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't. Just don't. I've seen the texts. I've seen the camera footage. I know everything. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she looked like she might faint. Tony, meanwhile, looked like he was ready to bolt out the door, but I wasn't about to let him off that easy. You, I said, pointing at him. Ow! Now! He hesitated, glancing at Olivia for some kind of direction, but I didn't give him time to think. I said, get out. I growled, my voice firmer than I thought it could be. Without another word, Tony scurried past me and out the front door, leaving Olivia and me alone in the wreckage of what used to be our life together. The silence after Tony left was deafening. Olivia stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide, her breathing shallow. For a moment, neither of us said a word. I just stared at her, waiting for her to say something, anything, to explain why my life had just imploded. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky and defensive. Look, it's not what you think, she said, folding her arms across her chest like she was trying to shield herself from the truth. Not what I think, I repeated, laughing bitterly. You've been sneaking around with the pizza guy for months. I've got the texts, the camera footage, and I just walked in on the two of you. What part of that am I misunderstanding, Olivia? Her lips parted as if she was about to respond, but then she hesitated. Instead of admitting what was painfully obvious, she doubled down on the lies. He's just a friend, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A friend? I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. A friend who comes over when I'm not here? A friend who sends you shirtless selfies? A friend you're texting about dessert? And God knows what else. Her face flushed, but she still wouldn't admit it. You've been gone so much lately, she said, her voice rising. I've been lonely, okay? And Tony, he listens to me. He's there for me in a way you haven't been. I felt my chest tighten as the anger bubbled to the surface. So, this is my fault now? I work long hours to keep this house, to give us the life we have, and this is how you repay me? By screwing around with the delivery guy? She flinched at my words, but instead of apologizing, she pushed back harder. You don't get it, she snapped. You're always gone. And when you're here, it's like you're not even present. You're too busy with work to notice me, to see what I need. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to paint herself as the victim, as if her betrayal was somehow justified because I'd been working to provide for us. So what? I shot back. You decided to get your attention fixed from Tony instead of talking to me? Instead of telling me how you felt? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt. But then she shook her head, her jaw tightening. I didn't plan for this to happen, she said. It just did. The sheer absurdity of her words made me laugh, a harsh, humorless sound that felt more like a release of anger than amusement. It just happened? I said, shaking my head. That's your excuse? You accidentally invited him over, accidentally let him into our house, and what accidentally fell for him? I didn't fall for him, she shouted, her voice cracking. It wasn't like that. It was just physical. It didn't mean anything. Her words hit me like a gut punch. It didn't mean anything? She had destroyed our marriage, shattered my trust. And for what? Something meaningless? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. Do you have any idea what you've done? I asked quietly. Do you even care what this has done to me? To us? Her tears started falling then, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of regret or just tears because she'd been caught. Of course I care, she whispered. I didn't want to hurt you. Didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. Olivia, you've been lying to me for months. You've been sneaking around behind my back, inviting a stranger into our home, into our life. How can you stand there and say you didn't want to hurt me? She didn't respond, and the silence between us felt heavier than ever. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the room as I tried to process everything. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my whole heart, had betrayed me in the most humiliating way possible. I can't do this right now, I finally said, my voice cold and distant. I need some time to think. Olivia's face crumpled, and she took a step toward me, reaching out as if to stop me. "Please don't go," she begged. "We can talk about this. We can fix this." I turned to her, my expression hard. "Fix this?" I said. "How do you propose we fix this, Olivia? Because I don't see how we come back from this." She didn't have an answer. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, leaving her standing there, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house. Not with her, not after everything I'd just learned. As I got into my car and drove away, the weight of what had just happened hit me like a ton of bricks. My marriage was over, whether I wanted to admit it or not. And the worst part? I didn't know if I'd ever be able to trust anyone again, that I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the streetlights blurring into streaks of yellow and white as I tried to make sense of everything. My mind was a storm, thoughts racing faster than I could process. How had it come to this? How had my life, my marriage, fallen apart so completely? I pulled into the parking lot of a small diner on the edge of town. It was one of those 24-hour spots that always smelled like burnt coffee and fried food, perfect for someone looking to disappear into their thoughts. Sliding into a booth by the window, I stared at the laminated menu, not really seeing it. A waitress approached, her voice cheerful but tinged with that late shift exhaustion. "What can I get you, hon?" "Just coffee," I mumbled, barely looking up. She nodded and walked away, leaving me to the silence I craved. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I already knew who it was. Olivia. I ignored the first call, then the second. By the third, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled my phone out, her name flashing on the screen, and hit decline. A moment later, a text came through. "Please come home. We need to talk. I love you." I stared at the words, my jaw tightening. She loved me? That was rich. If she loved me, she wouldn't have done this. If she loved me, she wouldn't have invited some random pizza guy into our home, into our life. The waitress returned with my coffee, setting it down gently. "You okay, sweetie?" she asked, her tone kind but cautious. I forced a smile. "Just a rough night." She gave me a knowing nod. "Coffee's on the house. Sounds like you need it." "Thanks," I muttered, watching her walk away. The coffee was hot, bitter, and exactly what I needed to stay grounded. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through the messages between Olivia and Tony. Each one felt like a knife to the chest, cutting deeper than the last. There was one text in particular I couldn't stop fixating on. "You're the only thing keeping me sane right now. I don't know what I'd do without you." She'd sent that to him a week ago. A week ago, when I'd been sitting across from her at dinner, telling her about my upcoming business trip, completely clueless about what was really going on. The rage bubbled up again, threatening to take over. But beneath the anger was something worse, something I didn't want to admit. I felt broken, humiliated, unwanted. The woman I'd shared my life with had turned to someone else, and not just anyone, a pizza delivery guy. It felt like a slap in the face, like she wasn't just betraying me, but mocking me in the process. And the more I thought about it, the more questions burned in my mind. Was it just Tony? Or had there been others? How long had she been lying to me? And why hadn't I seen it sooner? I knew I couldn't sit in that diner forever, drowning in my misery. At some point, I'd have to face Olivia again. But not tonight. Tonight I needed time to think, time to decide what the hell I was going to do next. I paid for the coffee, leaving a generous tip for the kind waitress, and headed back to my car. The drive home felt like a death march, each mile bringing me closer to a confrontation I wasn't ready for. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the faint glow of the porch light. Olivia hadn't left any more messages or texts, but I knew she was inside, waiting for me. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to turn the key and drive away again, to avoid the mess waiting for me behind that door. But I couldn't run forever. Finally, I got out of the car and walked up the steps, my heart pounding with every step. When I opened the door, Olivia was sitting on the couch, her face red and blotchy from crying. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. "You came back," she whispered. I didn't respond, just closed the door behind me and leaned against it, crossing my arms. I'm here, I said flatly. But don't think for a second that means everything's fine. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. I know. I'm glad you're here. We need to talk. Yeah, I said, my voice cold. We do. I could see her bracing herself, searching for the right words. But before she could speak, I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said. Don't try to justify it. Don't try to blame it on me. I want the truth, Olivia. All of it. No more lies. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, looking down at her hands. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I never meant for this to happen, she said finally, her voice barely audible. I shook my head, my patience wearing thin. I don't care what you meant, Olivia. I care about what you did. So start talking. Her shoulders slumped, and she took a shaky breath. It started after your last business trip, she admitted. I was feeling lonely, and he was just there. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. So that's it? I go out of town for work, and you decide to shack up with the first guy who shows up at the door? Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds? Her face crumpled, and she started crying again, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. I didn't know where this conversation was going, but one thing was clear. Nothing about our marriage would ever be the same. Olivia sat there, her sobs filling the room as I stared at her, my heart a churning mix of anger and disbelief. I wanted answers, real ones, not the half-baked excuses she kept throwing at me. You're going to tell me everything, I said, my voice low but firm. No lies. No deflecting. I want to know the truth, every detail. Why now? She sniffled, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her sweatshirt. It wasn't planned, she mumbled, her voice cracking. It just happened. I couldn't help but laugh, a harsh, bitter sound that made her flinch. It just happened, I repeated mockingly. You keep saying that like it's supposed to make it better. Like tripping and falling into bed with him was an accident. Do you even hear yourself? She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. You don't understand, she said weakly. You're damn right I don't understand, I shot back. Explain it to me, Olivia. Help me understand why my wife of 10 years decided to throw everything away for some delivery guy. Her face flushed with shame, and for a moment, I thought she might stay silent. But then she started talking, her words tumbling out in a rush. I was lonely, okay? You're always gone, always working. I go days without feeling like I even existed to you. And then Tony, he was there. He made me feel seen. See? I repeated, my voice rising. You're telling me you cheated because you wanted attention? That's your justification? Her tears started again, but I wasn't about to let her use them as a shield. Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds, Olivia? You were lonely, so instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to sneak around with the pizza guy. She winced at the venom in my tone, but didn't try to deny it. It wasn't like that at first, she whispered. We just talked. He'd come by, and we'd chat for a bit. I didn't think it would turn into this. I shook my head, pacing the room, and yet it did. What changed? When did just talking turn into something more? She hesitated, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, like she was debating whether or not to tell me the truth. Tell me, I demanded, stopping in front of her. I want to know everything. The first time, the last time, all of it. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. The first time was about 2 months ago, she admitted. You were on that trip to Chicago. He came over to drop off an order, and he stayed. We had a glass of wine, and one thing led to another. My stomach churned at her words, but I forced myself to stay calm. And the last time? I asked, my voice icy. She glanced at me nervously, her lower lip trembling. Today, she said quietly. My jaw tightened, and I took a step back, the full weight of her betrayal crashing down on me. So, let me get this straight, I said slowly. You've been sneaking around with him for months, lying to my face, and you didn't even have the decency to stop when you knew I was onto you? I didn't know you knew, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger from boiling over. That's your excuse? You didn't know I knew, so you thought you could keep getting away with it? God, Olivia, Do you even hear yourself? She broke down completely then, her sobs racking her body as she buried her face in her hands. I'm sorry, she choked out. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to hurt me? I said, my voice trembling with rage. You invited him into our home, Olivia. Into our life. You laughed with him, drank with him, and God knows what else. All while I was out working my ass off to provide for us. And now you're sitting here telling me you didn't mean to hurt me. She didn't respond, her cries the only sound in the room. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, teetering on the brink of collapse. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said finally, my voice hollow. She looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen. I'm still me, she whispered. I made a mistake, a horrible, unforgivable mistake. But I'm still the woman you fell in love with, the woman who loves you. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. I don't know if I can do this, I said, shaking my head. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. She reached out for me, but I stepped back, her touch burning like fire. I need space, I said firmly. I need time to think, and until I figure out what I want, you and I were done. Her sobs grew louder as I turned and walked out the door, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like 1,000 bricks. I didn't know where I was going, but one thing was clear. Nothing about my life would ever be the same. Walking out of that house was supposed to give me some clarity, but all it did was amplify the chaos swirling in my mind. I drove aimlessly again, the weight of Olivia's words still ringing in my ears. I'm still the woman you fell in love with. The woman who loves you. How could she say that? How could she even begin to claim love when every action she'd taken over the last few months screamed otherwise? I ended up at a motel on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where the walls were too thin and the fluorescent lights flickered in the hallway, but it was cheap, and more importantly, it wasn't home. I checked in, tossed my bag on the bed, and collapsed into the lumpy mattress, staring up at the ceiling as the full gravity of the situation hit me. She had admitted it, everything, the affair, the lies, even the shameless gall of carrying on with him, while I was working to keep our life afloat. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to grasp the magnitude of what she'd done. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling me out of my spiraling thoughts. It was Olivia again. I'm so sorry. Please, let's talk. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I stared at the screen, the rage bubbling up again. Fix it? How exactly did she plan to do that? Erase the months of lies? Rewrite the nights I spent wondering why she was suddenly so distant? I tossed the phone aside, but it buzzed again. Another message. Please, don't give up on us. I need you. Need me? She had Tony for that, didn't she? I turned the phone off, silencing the onslaught of her apologies. And for the first time in hours, the room was quiet. Too quiet. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts bounced between anger, betrayal, and a hollow ache that I couldn't shake. Memories of our life together played on a loop. Our wedding day, the vacations, the quiet nights spent watching movies on the couch. I wanted to cling to those moments, but they felt tainted now, overshadowed by her infidelity. The next morning, I woke up with a splitting headache and the taste of bitterness lingering in my mouth. I knew I couldn't hide out forever. The situation wouldn't resolve itself, no matter how much I wished it would. After grabbing a cup of bad motel coffee, I sat in my car, staring at my phone, debating my next move. That's when I remembered something. The camera. I still had access to the doorbell camera at home, and suddenly I felt a morbid curiosity to see if Tony had tried to come back. If Olivia was serious about fixing things, surely she would have cut him off by now. I opened the app, my heart pounding as I scrolled through the most recent footage. There wasn't much, just the usual mailman and a couple of neighborhood kids riding their bikes past the house. But then, at 11:47 p.m. the night before, a familiar figure appeared. Tony. He was standing on my porch, his hands shoved in his pockets, looking around nervously. He rang the doorbell once, then waited. After a moment, Olivia opened the door. She didn't invite him in this time, but they stood there talking for several minutes. I couldn't hear their conversation, but her body language told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't angry, She wasn't telling him to leave or slamming the door in his face. No, she was calm, comfortable. The video ended with Tony walking away, but the damage was done. I slammed my phone down on the dashboard, my hands shaking. After everything we'd talked about, after her desperate pleas to fix this, she still hadn't cut ties with him. She'd lied to me again. My vision blurred with anger as I gripped the steering wheel. If she thought I was just going to sit back and let her play me for a fool, she had another thing coming. It was time to stop waiting for answers and start demanding them. That'd be why the time I pulled into the driveway, my blood was boiling. The image of Tony standing on my porch was seared into my mind. After everything Olivia had said, after her tearful promises to make things right, she still hadn't let him go. I slammed the car door shut and marched up to the house. My keys rattled in my hand as I unlocked the door, the sound echoing in the tense silence. Olivia was sitting at the dining table, her phone in front of her, and she looked up, startled, when she saw me. "You're back," she said, her voice wavering. "Don't act surprised," I snapped, tossing my keys on the counter. "I'm sure you knew I'd come back eventually." What I didn't expect was for Tony to come back too. Her face drained of color, and she froze like a deer caught in headlights. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "Don't play dumb, Olivia," I said, pulling out my phone and opening the doorbell footage. "I saw him last night on my porch, talking to you. Do you want to explain why he was here after you supposedly wanted to fix this?" She blinked, her mouth opening and closing as she scrambled for an excuse. "He just showed up," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask him to come. I told him it was over. But he wanted to talk." I scoffed, shaking my head. "And you just let him? After everything, you thought it was a good idea to stand there chatting with him like nothing happened?" "I didn't let him in," she said defensively, as if that somehow made it better. "Oh well, good for you," I said sarcastically. "You didn't let him in? What do you want him, meddle? The fact that he was even here at all tells me you haven't been honest with him. Or with me." Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't about to let her use them as a shield again. "I told him it was over," she repeated, her voice cracking. "I told him I wanted to work on my marriage. But he didn't listen. He said he couldn't let me go." I let out a bitter laugh, pacing the room. "So now it's his fault, huh? Tony the pizza guy can't let you go, and you're just some helpless victim in all of this? Do you even hear yourself, Olivia?" "I'm telling you the truth," she cried, standing up from the table. "I didn't want him to come here. I told him to leave." I turned to face her, my jaw clenched. And yet, there he was, and here you are, still lying to me. How am I supposed to believe anything you say? How do I know this is even over? She wiped at her tears, shaking her head. "I don't know what else to say," she whispered. "I've made mistakes, and I hate myself for them. But I'm trying, okay? I'm trying to fix this." "Fix this?" I said, my voice rising. "You don't fix a marriage by sneaking around and lying to your husband. You don't fix a marriage by having late-night chats with the guy you cheated with." She flinched, her shoulders shaking as she started crying again. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but only for a moment. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice quieter now. "You say you're trying, but your actions say otherwise. And honestly, I don't even know if I want to try anymore." Her sobs grew louder, and she took a step toward me, her hands trembling. "Please," she whispered, "don't give up on us. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm serious. I'll cut him off completely. I'll go to counseling. I'll do anything. Just please don't leave me." Her desperation was palpable, and for a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she meant every word, that there was still something worth saving in our marriage. But then I thought about the months of lies, the texts, the footage, and Tony standing on my porch like he belonged there. I took a step back, putting distance between us. "I need time," I said, my voice cold and firm. "I need time to figure out if there's even anything left to save here. And if there is, it's going to take a hell of a lot more than words to convince me." She nodded, her tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she whispered. "Take all the time you need. Just please don't shut me out completely." I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, my heart heavy with the weight of her betrayal. The drive away from the house felt like déjà vu, except this time, my anger had settled into something colder, sharper. Olivia's tears, her desperate pleas, her hollow promises, they weren't enough anymore. I needed to clear my head, but I also needed a plan. I ended up at a park near my old high school, sitting on a creaky bench under a tree. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the empty playground. I pulled out my phone and stared at it, debating my next move. Olivia wasn't the only one who needed to face the consequences of this mess. Tony had played a part in this disaster, too, and it was time I confronted him. A quick search of his name in Olivia's text brought up a clue, a restaurant name. He'd mentioned it a couple of times, bragging about how it was his side hustle. I knew the place. It wasn't far, just a hole-in-the-wall pizzeria on the edge of town. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the call button for the restaurant. Was I really about to do this? But the more I thought about Tony's smug face, the way he'd stood on my porch like he belonged there, the more I felt justified. I pressed the button. "Tony's Pizza. How can I help you?" A cheerful voice answered. "I need to speak with Tony," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "Is he there?" "Yeah, just a sec." I waited, my grip tightening on the phone as I heard muffled voices in the background. "Hello?" It was him. His voice was casual, almost lazy, and it sent a surge of anger through me. "Tony," I said, my voice hard. "This is Olivia's husband." There was a pause, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "Oh," he said finally. "Look, man, I don't think—" "Save it," I interrupted, my voice rising. "I'm not calling to hear your excuses. I'm calling to let you know that I know everything. I know what you've been doing with my wife. I know how you've been sneaking around, lying, and disrespecting me in my own house." "Look, dude, I didn't mean for things to get this far," he said, his tone suddenly defensive. "It just— don't," I snapped. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You knew she was married. You knew what you were doing. And now, you're going to deal with the consequences." "Hey, man, it wasn't just me," he said, his voice rising. "She was the one who— Don't you dare try to blame this on her," I interrupted. "You're both guilty. But you're the one who walked into my house, smiled in my wife's face, and thought you could get away with it." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he might have hung up. "Are you done?" he said finally, his tone laced with irritation. "Because I've got nothing else to say to you." "Oh, we're not done," I said, my voice cold. "Not even close. You got no idea what you've stepped into." I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding in my chest. Confronting him hadn't given me the satisfaction I'd hoped for, but it had solidified one thing in my mind. I wasn't going to let him or Olivia get away with this unscathed. As I sat there, staring at the fading sunlight, a plan began to form. If they thought they could make a fool out of me, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The call with Tony had done nothing to calm me down. If anything, it only fanned the flames. His dismissive tone, his lack of remorse, it all added fuel to the fire already burning inside me. But instead of letting that fire consume me, I decided to channel it. If Olivia and Tony thought they could walk all over me, they had another thing coming. I wasn't just going to sit back and play the role of the betrayed husband. I was going to take control of the situation, and I was going to make sure neither of them forgot what they'd done. The first step was information. Tony didn't know me. Not really, but I knew enough about him. Thanks to Olivia's texts, I had his full name, his phone number, and now, the name of the pizzeria where he worked. I also had a pretty good idea of what kind of person he was: careless, cocky, and arrogant. People like that always made mistakes, and I was counting on it. That evening, I parked near the pizzeria and waited. It wasn't the most glamorous stakeout, but I didn't care. I had one goal: to gather as much dirt on Tony as I could. If he had skeletons in his closet, I was going to find them. For the next few hours, I watched him through the front window. He flirted with customers, joked with his coworkers, and carried himself with the kind of swagger that made me want to punch him through the glass. He was exactly the kind of guy who thought he could get away with anything. Around 10 p.m., he came out the back door, tossing a trash bag into the dumpster before lighting a cigarette. I snapped a couple of photos from my car, my mind already spinning with ideas. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet, but I figured they might come in handy. The next day, I started digging deeper. A quick search of his name on social media turned up a few profiles. Nothing surprising, but enough to confirm he wasn't exactly a model citizen. Pictures of him at bars, surrounded by women, flashing cash he probably didn't have. Then, I hit the jackpot. A post from a few months ago, buried in the comments of one of his friends' photos. Tony's got balls doing that while he's still on probation. Hope he doesn't get caught again. I couldn't believe my luck. A quick search of public records confirmed it. Tony had a criminal record. Nothing too serious, a DUI and a couple of minor theft charges. But it was enough to paint a picture. I smiled to myself, a sense of vindication washing over me. Tony wasn't just a homewrecker. He was a screw-up. And now I had the ammunition I needed to expose him for what he really was. Later that day, I called a lawyer, a friend of a friend who specialized in family law. I didn't tell him everything, but I laid out the basics. My wife's infidelity, Tony's involvement, and the need to protect myself in case things got ugly. Document everything, the lawyer said. Every text, every call, every interaction. If this goes to court, you'll need proof. And if her affair jeopardizes your finances or your assets, you'll have a strong case. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Olivia and Tony had underestimated me, but they were about to learn the hard way that I wasn't someone they could toy with. That evening, I returned home, my resolve stronger than ever. Olivia was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up when I walked in, her expression a mix of hope and fear. "You're back," she said softly. "I'm back," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "Can we talk?" she asked tentatively. "We will," I said, taking a seat across from her. "But not on your terms. Things are going to change, Olivia. Starting now." She swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Okay, what do you need from me?" "I need you to be honest," I said. "Completely, brutally honest. No more lies, no more excuses. If you want any chance of salvaging this marriage, you're going to have to earn it. And that starts with cutting Tony out of your life for good." "I already told him it's over," she said, her voice trembling. "Prove it," I said. "Block his number. Delete his texts. And if I see him anywhere near this house again, we're done. No second chances." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do it," she whispered. "Good," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Because this is your last chance, Olivia. You've already destroyed my trust. If you want to rebuild it, you're going to have to do more than talk. You're going to have to show me." She wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. "I will," she said. "I promise." I didn't respond, just stood up and walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the living room. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even reconciliation. It was survival, and it was just the beginning. The next few days were tense, like walking on a tightrope above a pit of jagged glass. Olivia kept her distance, and I kept my focus. I wasn't interested in her tears or her apologies anymore. Words meant nothing without action. To her credit, she did what I asked, at least on the surface. I watched as she blocked Tony's number, deleted their texts, and even unfollowed him on social media. She tried to act normal, but I could see the cracks in her demeanor. Whether it was guilt, regret, or just the realization that she'd been caught, I didn't care. All I cared about was making sure she had no way of reaching him again. But I wasn't naive. People like Tony didn't just go away, and Olivia's history with him told me he wasn't the kind to respect boundaries. That's why I kept digging. The next piece of my plan required patience. I needed more leverage, something that would not only sever Olivia and Tony's connection for good, but also make him regret ever stepping foot in my life. And as luck would have it, Tony's probation gave me the perfect angle. I reached out to a buddy of mine, Greg, who worked in local law enforcement. I wasn't looking for anything illegal, just a little information to confirm what I already knew. Over a coffee, I explained the situation in vague terms, leaving out the more personal details. "Let's just say there's a guy who's been causing problems," I said. "I heard he's on probation, and I need to know if there's anything I should be aware of." Greg raised an eyebrow, clearly curious, but he didn't press me for details. "Nay, Tony Martinez," I said. He nodded, pulling out his phone. A few minutes later, he leaned back in his chair, frowning. "You're right. He's on probation for DUI and petty theft. Looks like he's required to stay out of trouble, avoid alcohol, and hold a steady job. A plan began to form in my mind, the pieces clicking into place. Thanks, Greg, I said, shaking his hand. You've been a big help. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. If Tony thought he could worm his way into my life without consequences, he was about to learn otherwise. I waited until the weekend to put my plan into motion. Late Friday night, after Olivia had gone to bed, I parked outside the pizzeria where Tony worked, watching as the staff began closing up for the night. Sure enough, Tony came out around midnight, laughing with a co-worker as they headed to their cars. But instead of leaving, Tony lingered in the parking lot, pulling out a flask from his jacket and taking a long swig. I snapped a few photos from my car, my heart pounding with adrenaline. Drinking while on probation? That was a direct violation of his terms. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I made an anonymous call to his probation officer, leaving a detailed tip about Tony's drinking and his general disregard for the rules. I didn't know how quickly they'd act, but I was willing to wait. Meanwhile, I kept things quiet at home. Olivia didn't need to know what I was up to. Not yet. She was still walking on eggshells, trying to prove that she was all in on fixing our marriage. But I wasn't ready to trust her, and I doubted I ever would. By Monday morning, I got the confirmation I'd been waiting for. A quick check of Tony's social media showed a cryptic post. Some people really can't mind their own business. SMH. Karma's gonna get you. It didn't take a genius to figure out what had happened. Tony had been caught, and from the looks of it, he wasn't happy about it. I smiled to myself, feeling a flicker of satisfaction for the first time in weeks. This was only the beginning. As for Olivia, she was about to find out that the price of betrayal wasn't something you could pay off with a few tears and empty promises that by the time Monday evening rolled around. The air at home felt heavier than ever. Olivia had been quieter than usual all day, a nervous energy radiating off her that she couldn't quite hide. She kept glancing at her phone, biting her lip, and fidgeting like she was expecting bad news. I, on the other hand, played it cool. I went about my evening like nothing was wrong, savoring the knowledge that the first part of my plan had already started to unfold. Over dinner, Olivia finally broke the silence. So, she said cautiously, pushing a piece of broccoli around her plate. I've been thinking about what you said, about showing you I'm serious. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. And I made an appointment with a counselor, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For us. I thought, maybe it could help. I stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for any sign of manipulation. She looked sincere, or at least as sincere as someone who had been caught red-handed could look. We'll see, I said finally, my tone measured. But like I said, this isn't going to be fixed with words or appointments. You got a long way to go, Olivia. I know, she said quickly. I know I've messed up, but I want to fix this. I really do. Her words hung in the air, but before I could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. Her face paled, and she snatched it up so quickly it almost fell out of her hands. Who is it? I asked, my eyes narrowing. It's nothing, she said, her voice shaky. Just a spam text. Let me see. Her eyes widened, and she clutched the phone tighter, confirming exactly what I already suspected. Olivia, I said coldly, leaning forward. Let me see. She hesitated for a moment, her hand trembling, before reluctantly sliding the phone across the table. I picked it up, my pulse quickening as I read the screen. It wasn't Tony, but it was close enough. It was a message from one of her friends, Amy, a friend who had always seemed a little too supportive of Olivia's me time. Just heard what happened with T. OMG, are you okay? Call me. I clenched my jaw, passing the phone back to her. Care to explain? She stared at the screen, her face a mixture of fear and guilt. I don't know what she's talking about, she stammered. Try again, I said sharply. Her shoulders sagged, and she let out a shaky breath. She probably means Tony. I guess he told someone about his probation thing. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but didn't let it show. And how does she know about Tony in the first place? She's just been someone I confided in, Olivia said, her voice barely audible. I needed someone to talk to, and you talked to her about him. I finished, my voice rising. while lying to me, sneaking around, and destroying our marriage. Unbelievable. I'm sorry, she said, tears pooling in her eyes. I didn't mean. Stop saying you didn't mean to do things, Olivia. I snapped. You knew exactly what you were doing. Every choice you made, every lie you told, it was deliberate. And now you're trying to fix it with half-truths and damage control. She broke down crying, but I was too far gone to care. I stood up from the table, pacing the room as the weight of everything threatened to crush me again. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I said finally, my voice hollow. You say you want to fix things, but how can I believe that when you're still hiding things from me? When you're still protecting him? I'm not protecting him, she cried. I haven't talked to him since that night, I swear. Then why is he still reaching out to people in your circle? Why are your friends asking if you're okay because of him? She had no answer, just more tears and muffled apologies. I shook my head, grabbing my jacket from the back of the chair. Where are you going? She asked, panic flashing across her face. I need air, I said coldly, walking to the door. Don't wait up. As I stepped outside, the night air hit me like a slap to the face, sharp and sobering. I didn't know where I was going, but one thing was clear. The deeper I dug into this mess, the worse it got. And something told me the worst was still yet to come, that I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours. The events of the last few days replaying in my mind like a broken record. Olivia's tears, Tony's smug attitude, the cryptic message from her friend. Every piece of it gnawed at me, refusing to let me rest. Eventually, I ended up at a bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where nobody asks questions and the drinks are cheap. I needed something, anything, to dull the chaos in my head, even if only for a little while. Sliding onto a stool at the far end of the bar, I ordered a whiskey neat. The bartender nodded and poured me a generous glass, sliding it across the counter with a sympathetic look. Rough day? He asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. You have no idea, I muttered, taking a long sip. The burn of the alcohol was almost comforting, a reminder that I could still feel something other than anger and betrayal. As I sat there, nursing my drink, I couldn't stop thinking about Olivia. For all her promises to fix things, it felt like she was still hiding pieces of the truth. And Tony? He was a wild card, a loose end that could unravel everything if I wasn't careful. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my messages. My thumb hovered over Olivia's name for a moment before I closed the app and opened the camera footage instead. I couldn't explain why, but something about seeing him on my porch again made my blood boil. The footage was the same as before. Tony standing there, shifting awkwardly while Olivia spoke to him. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't caught before, a small package in his hand. It wasn't pizza. What the hell? I muttered, rewinding the footage and watching it again. The package was plain, brown paper tied with string. Small enough to hold in one hand, but too bulky to be something insignificant. I replayed the clip several times, trying to figure out what it could be, but nothing made sense. I drained the rest of my whiskey and signaled the bartender for another. My mind was racing with questions, each one more infuriating than the last. What was in the package? Why hadn't Olivia mentioned it? And why was Tony still showing up like he had unfinished business? I texted Greg, my cop friend, on a whim. Hey, quick question. How do I check if someone's involved in something shady? Asking for a friend. Greg responded almost immediately. You mean like criminal activity? Depends. What kind of shady are we talking? I hesitated, unsure of how much to say. Let's just say someone I know has been making suspicious deliveries. Any way to check their record beyond the basics? Could be something worth flagging if you have proof, Greg replied. But if you're looking for something specific, you'd need to catch them in the act or get an inside source. Want me to look into it? My heart pounded as I read his message. Did I really want to go down this road? Yeah, I typed back. Do it. His name's Tony Martinez. Works at Tony's Pizza. Let me know what you find. Greg didn't reply right away, but I knew he'd follow through. And in the meantime, I had to figure out my next move. The bartender interrupted my thoughts, setting down my second drink with a knowing look. Whatever you're dealing with, he said, just remember, nothing stays buried forever. Truth always finds its way out. I gave him a tight-lipped smile, his words hitting closer to home than he probably realized. As I sipped my drink, I felt my phone buzz again. This time, it was a notification from the camera app, motion detected at front door. My heart sank as I opened the app, half expecting to see Tony standing there again. But it wasn't Tony. It was Olivia, standing on the porch, her phone pressed to her ear. She was pacing back and forth, her expression tense, her free hand gesturing wildly as if she was arguing with someone. I turned up the volume, straining to hear what she was saying, but the audio was too faint to make out. "Who the hell are you talking to?" I muttered under my breath, watching as she continued her frantic pacing. After a few minutes, she ended the call and went back inside, slamming the door behind her. I stared at the screen, my mind racing with possibilities. Who'd she been talking to? Was it Tony? Her friend Amy? Someone else entirely? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Olivia wasn't telling me the whole truth. And I was determined to find out exactly what she was hiding. No matter what it took that I sat in my car, staring at my phone, Olivia's pacing burned into my memory. Whatever she was arguing about on the porch, it wasn't something innocent. Her body language, the way her voice carried, even though I couldn't make out the words, it all screamed tension. I needed answers. I debated driving home right then and there, storming in and demanding she tell me who was on the other end of that call. But I knew it wouldn't get me anywhere. Olivia was skilled at deflection, and if she felt cornered, she'd just spin more lies. Instead, I decided to play it smarter. I called Greg again. "Hey," he answered on the second ring. "What's up? Can you run another check for me?" I asked, my voice low. There was a pause. "You're on a roll tonight," Greg said, his tone amused. "All right. Who's this one about?" "Olivia," I admitted reluctantly. Greg let out a low whistle. "Your wife? Man, you sure you want to go down this road?" "Just do it," I said. "Check her phone records if you can. I need to know who she's been calling." Greg hesitated. "You know I can't officially do that without a warrant, right?" "Unofficially, then," I said firmly. "Please, Greg. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." He sighed. "Fine. Give me her number. I'll see what I can find." I rattled off Olivia's number, my hands trembling slightly as I ended the call. If Greg came through, I'd finally have something concrete, something Olivia couldn't wriggle out of. But for now, all I could do was wait. I stayed parked in that lot for over an hour, my mind racing with possibilities. What if Olivia was still in contact with Tony? What if there was someone else involved, someone I didn't even know about? Eventually, my phone buzzed with a text from Greg. "Run a quick check. Your wife's been making regular calls to a number registered under Pizza Place Holdings. Ring a bell." My stomach dropped. Tony. It had to be him. How regular? I typed back. "Twice yesterday, once today," Greg replied. All under 10 minutes, but still. My heart pounded as I read his message. So much for Olivia's promises. She'd been lying to me the entire time. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, the anger bubbling up like lava. She had looked me in the eye, sworn she'd cut him off, and yet here she was still calling him. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a slap in the face. I drove home in a haze, my thoughts a storm of rage and heartbreak. When I walked through the door, Olivia was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She looked up when she saw me, her expression wary. "You're back," she said cautiously. "Yeah," I said flatly, shutting the door behind me. "I'm back." I didn't sit down. I just stood there, staring at her, my hands clenched at my sides. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with feigned innocence. I pulled out my phone, opening the text from Greg and holding it out for her to see. "Care to explain why you're still calling him?" Her face went pale, her phone slipping from her hands onto the couch. Save it," I snapped, my voice trembling with anger. "Don't even try to deny it. I have the proof. You've been calling him Olivia. After everything you said, after all your fake promises, you're still talking to him." She stammered, her eyes wide with panic. "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "Then tell me what it is," I said coldly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still keeping secrets." She swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. "He called me first," she said finally. "I only answered because I didn't want him to show up again. I thought if I talked to him, I could get him to leave us alone." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. And you didn't think to tell me this? You just decided to handle it on your own like I wouldn't find out? I didn't want to make things worse, she said, her voice cracking. I thought if I told you, you'd get mad and what, Olivia? I interrupted. You thought I'd get mad, so instead you lied to my face? How is that better? She broke down completely, her sobs filling the room, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. This wasn't about her tears anymore. It was about her choices, the choices that had destroyed everything we'd built together. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Neither do I said, my voice hollow. But one thing's for sure, you can't fix it while you're still lying to me. I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the wreckage of her own making that I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my mind a battlefield of emotions. Anger, hurt, betrayal, and a strange, hollow kind of acceptance. Olivia's excuses, her endless tears, her promises, they had all blurred into white noise. No matter how much she cried or how often she swore she wanted to fix things, her actions spoke louder than her words. I had tried to salvage our marriage. I had given her the chance to cut ties, to rebuild the trust she had shattered. But she hadn't taken it seriously. She had lied to me again, and this time, I was done. By morning, my decision was clear. I walked downstairs, finding Olivia asleep on the couch. Her face was puffy, her cheeks streaked with dried tears. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of everything she had done. Olivia, I said, my voice firm enough to wake her. She stirred, blinking groggily before sitting up. You're up early, she murmured, her voice hoarse. We need to talk, I said, standing over her. And this time, I'm doing the talking. Her eyes widened, and she straightened up, wiping her face. Okay, she said quietly. I gave you a chance, I began. I gave you every opportunity to come clean, to cut ties, to prove to me that you wanted to fix this. But instead, you lied. You kept calling him, and then you hid it from me. You betrayed me, Olivia, over and over again. Her lip quivered, but I pressed on before she could interrupt. I've realized something, I said. This isn't about whether or not I love you anymore. This is about respect. And you've shown me, time and time again, that you have none for me. None for this marriage. She started crying, shaking her head. That's not true, she whispered. I love you, I do. I made mistakes. I didn't know how to handle it. And mistakes? I interrupted, my voice rising. Mistakes are leaving the laundry in the washer too long. What you did was deliberate. You chose to invite him into our lives. You chose to lie to me, to disrespect me. And I can't do it anymore. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't waver. I'd made my decision, and there was no turning back. I'm done, I said, my voice cold and final. I'm filing for divorce. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face frozen in shock. No, she whispered. You don't mean that. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes. Just please don't do this. It's too late, I said, shaking my head. You had your chance, Olivia. You had months to make this right, and you didn't. You didn't care enough to stop, and now I don't care enough to stay. She collapsed back onto the couch, her sobs racking her body. But I didn't feel the same sting of guilt I had before. I felt free. I turned and walked away, heading upstairs to gather my things. I wasn't going to drag this out any longer than necessary. By the end of the day, I had packed a suitcase and made arrangements to stay at a friend's place. Olivia begged me to reconsider, to stay and talk it out, but I couldn't. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. When I walked out the door for the last time, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for what we had lost, relief for what I was leaving behind, and a flicker of hope for what lay ahead. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the one I was choosing now. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally taking control.